Welcome to another eye-opening exploration into the Sigma male mindset. In today's video, we're diving deep into 8 things Sigma men absolutely do not tolerate. Crucial insights that separate true Sigma males from those merely pretending to embody this rare personality type. If you've ever wondered why Sigma men seem so respected yet feared, why they command attention without seeking it, today's breakdown will reveal exactly what these independent wolves refuse to accept in their lives. Before we begin this journey into the Sigma mindset, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Why? Because understanding these principles isn't just about knowledge, it's about transformation. Our channel delivers authentic Sigma male wisdom without the superficial tactics other channels promote. Each video is carefully researched to provide you with actionable insights that can genuinely elevate your mindset, improve your life outcomes, and help you develop that quiet, unshakable confidence that defines true Sigma men. Subscribe now to join our growing community of independent thinkers who are mastering life on their own terms. Now, let's examine these 8 non-negotiables that Sigma men will never tolerate, no matter the circumstances. Chapter 1. Strategic solitude. The first thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is any disruption to their strategic solitude. Unlike what many misunderstand, this isn't about being antisocial. It's about intentional isolation that serves a higher purpose. Sigma men recognize solitude as the fertile ground where their most powerful ideas take root. They understand that genuine creativity, deep reflection, and true self-mastery can only be achieved through periods of deliberate isolation from society's constant noise and influence. This is why they meticulously guard their alone time with an intensity that others might find intimidating or even offensive. For the Sigma male, being alone isn't a punishment but a privilege. It's in these quiet moments that they can objectively analyze their path, refine their strategies, and reconnect with their core values without external distortion. They view this time as non-negotiable mental training, as essential as physical exercise or financial planning. Consider how a Sigma male responds when friends or family constantly demand attention during his designated reflection periods. While others might cave to social pressure, the Sigma calmly but firmly establishes boundaries. I value our connection, but these hours are reserved for my personal development. No apologies, no lengthy explanations, just clear, confident boundary setting. This strategic solitude extends beyond just physical space. Sigma men also create mental solitude by limiting information intake, being selective about advice they receive, and regularly disconnecting from technology. They understand that mental clarity requires filtering out the overwhelming bombardment of opinions, news, and social media that clouds judgment and creates psychological dependency. In practice, this means a Sigma man might decline invitations to events that offer little value beyond superficial networking. It means he might go days without responding to non-essential messages. It means he might disappear periodically for personal retreats where he can recalibrate his focus without distraction. Many mistake this behavior for arrogance or social awkwardness, but the reality is far more calculated. The Sigma male recognizes that his greatest asset is his independent thinking, and this can only be maintained through regular periods of strategic solitude where external influences are minimized. Where the alpha seeks constant validation through social dominance and the beta through social acceptance, the Sigma finds his power by stepping outside the social matrix entirely, observing it objectively from a position of detachment. This gives him an almost unfair advantage in navigating complex social situations, as he's never trapped within them emotionally. This commitment to strategic solitude also explains why Sigma men are so difficult to manipulate or pressure. Their self-contained nature means they're comfortable walking away from any situation that doesn't serve their purpose. Their identity and emotional state aren't tied to external validation, giving them a psychological freedom that few others experience. For anyone developing a Sigma mindset, the first step is learning to embrace this strategic solitude without guilt or FOMO, fear of missing out. Start by scheduling non-negotiable blocks of time for self-reflection and independent thinking. Treat these appointments with yourself as seriously as you would any professional commitment. Over time, these periods will become your most valuable resource for personal evolution. Chapter 2. Dishonesty and Manipulation. The second thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is any form of dishonesty or manipulation, both directed at them and within themselves. This unwavering commitment to truth is perhaps the most defining characteristic of the authentic Sigma male personality. Unlike the stereotypical alpha who might use selective truth to maintain dominance, or the beta who might avoid uncomfortable truths to maintain harmony, the Sigma places truth above all social considerations. This doesn't mean being needlessly blunt or hurtful. It means having such a deep respect for reality that anything less than honesty feels like a violation of their core principles. For Sigma men, dishonesty isn't just an ethical issue, it's a practical one. They recognize that making decisions based on false information leads to wasted energy and misaligned efforts. When someone lies to a Sigma male, they're not just offending his moral sensibilities, they're interfering with his ability to navigate reality effectively, which he considers an unforgivable transgression. This intolerance for dishonesty manifests in several distinctive ways. First, Sigma men develop an almost supernatural ability to detect manipulation. They've spent so much time observing human behavior from their position outside the social hierarchy that they immediately recognize the subtle cues of deception. Inconsistencies in stories, emotional manipulation tactics, flattery designed to achieve an agenda, or information being strategically withheld. When a Sigma man encounters such behavior, his response is typically not dramatic confrontation, but immediate disengagement. He doesn't waste energy trying to reform manipulators or win arguments against deceivers. Instead, he simply removes them from his sphere of influence entirely without explanation or second chances. This clean-cut approach often shocks those accustomed to the social games of warnings, arguments, and reconciliations. Consider how a Sigma male might respond to discovering a business partner has been slightly misrepresenting numbers. While others might confront the partner angrily or passively accept it to avoid conflict, the Sigma calmly documents the discrepancies, prepares an exit strategy, executes it without emotional display, and moves forward without looking back. The relationship is simply over. No drama required. This commitment to honesty extends most powerfully to the Sigma's relationship with himself. He refuses to tolerate self-deception, regularly examining his own motivations, weaknesses, and biases with brutal objectivity. Where others construct elaborate narratives to protect their egos, the Sigma male derives his confidence precisely from his willingness to acknowledge his flaws and work on them methodically. In practice, this means Sigma men often keep journals or engage in regular self-reflection exercises specifically designed to uncover their own blind spots. They actively seek out information that challenges their existing beliefs rather than confirming them. They're more interested in being effective than being right, which paradoxically makes them right more often. This relentless pursuit of truth can make Sigma men seem cold or unsympathetic to those who prefer comfortable illusions. When someone seeks emotional validation for a self-destructive behavior, the Sigma will offer honest assessment instead. When groupthink takes over a meeting, The Sigma will be the lone voice questioning underlying assumptions. This truth-oriented approach often makes them unpopular in the short term, but deeply respected in the long term. For those developing a Sigma mindset, cultivating this intolerance for dishonesty starts with small daily commitments to truth. Begin by eliminating white lies from your communication. Practice acknowledging your mistakes immediately rather than defending them. Train yourself to notice when you're seeking information that only confirms what you already believe. The path to the Sigma's powerful authenticity begins with these small acts of intellectual integrity. Chapter 3. Time-wasting activities. The third thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is the squandering of their most precious and non-renewable resource: time. This goes far beyond the usual productivity advice. For the Sigma male, time consciousness becomes a fundamental philosophy that shapes every decision. Sigma men view time with an almost religious reverence. They understand intuitively what many realize too late in life: that time is the ultimate currency, the one thing that cannot be earned back once spent. This perspective creates a natural intolerance for activities, people, or systems that consume time without providing proportionate value in return. This doesn't mean Sigma men are constantly working or obsessed with conventional productivity. Rather, they're intensely deliberate about how they allocate their hours, ensuring alignment with their core values and long-term vision. A Sigma might spend an entire day in nature or reading philosophy, activities others might view as unproductive because he recognizes their value for mental clarity and perspective. What Sigma men specifically eliminate are the unconscious time drains that most people accept without question. They're particularly adept at identifying socially sanctioned time wasters. The meetings that could have been emails, the obligatory social events that serve no purpose beyond tradition, the endless discussions where nothing gets decided, or the excessive consumption of mindless entertainment. Consider how a Sigma male handles workplace inefficiency. Where others silently endure 2-hour meetings that accomplish nothing, the Sigma will either find ways to make the meeting productive, request exemption if his presence isn't essential, or in some cases, change organizations entirely if time waste is systematic. He isn't held hostage by social expectations of putting in face time or being a team player when these concepts are used to justify inefficiency. This time, consciousness extends to relationships as well. Sigma men quickly identify and distance themselves from people who represent poor time investments: the perpetually dramatic, the consistently unreliable, the constantly needy, or those who take without giving in return. This isn't coldness, but clarity. They recognize that allowing these relationships to consume their time is a disservice to both parties. Perhaps most importantly, Sigma men are masters at avoiding the most insidious time waster of all: being busy without being effective. They understand the crucial difference between movement and progress. While others pride themselves on packed schedules and constant activity, the Sigma focuses relentlessly on outcomes, regularly asking, "Is this the most impactful use of my time toward my true objectives?" In practice, this means Sigma men often appear to move more slowly and deliberately than their peers, but paradoxically accomplish more of significance. They don't chase arbitrary metrics or rush to respond to every notification. They batch similar tasks, eliminate redundancies, and aren't afraid to use unconventional methods that save time, even if these methods raise eyebrows. A classic example is how Sigma men handle communication. Rather than being constantly available, they might designate specific times for responding to messages, use automation where appropriate, or simply opt out of communication platforms that create more noise than value. The initial social friction, this creates is outweighed by the massive time reclamation it allows. This intolerance for time wasting doesn't mean Sigma men never relax or enjoy leisure. In fact, they often design their lives to maximize true leisure, defined as time spent in genuinely rejuvenating activities rather than mindless distraction. The difference is that leisure is a conscious choice rather than a default state when nothing more important demands attention. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for time wasting begins with a time audit. Track how you spend your hours for a week with complete honesty, then brutally evaluate which activities yielded genuine value and which were simply habits, social obligations, or distractions. Begin eliminating the lowest value activities first, regardless of how normal or expected they might be. Chapter 4. Forced social conformity. The fourth thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is any attempt to force them into social conformity against their own judgment. This resistance to arbitrary social pressure is perhaps the most visible characteristic of the Sigma personality, and often what first draws people to the concept. Unlike alphas, who conform selectively to maintain their leadership position, or betas who conform readily to maintain group harmony, Sigma men evaluate social norms purely on their merits, without automatic deference to their popularity or tradition. This creates a distinctive pattern of behavior where Sigma men might follow certain conventions perfectly while completely disregarding others, often bewildering those around them. This selective approach to social norms isn't about rebellion for its own sake. Sigma men aren't interested in breaking rules just to prove their independence. That would be another form of reactionary conformity. Instead, they simply refrain from outsourcing their judgment to society. Each norm is evaluated on 3 criteria. Does it align with my values? Does it serve a practical purpose? Does following it advance my objectives? Consider how this plays out in professional settings. A Sigma male might meticulously follow certain company procedures he finds logical while completely ignoring others he deems pointless, regardless of their official importance. When questioned, he doesn't become defensive or rebellious, but calmly explains his reasoning. If the explanation isn't accepted, he doesn't compromise his judgment, but accepts any consequences with equanimity, knowing his integrity remains intact. This selective conformity extends to social situations as well. Sigma men are infamous for their willingness to leave social gatherings when they no longer serve a purpose, regardless of whether it's appropriate to do so. They might skip traditional celebrations that hold no meaning for them while creating their own meaningful rituals. They often refuse to participate in group activities driven by peer pressure, even when doing so marks them as outsiders. What's particularly noteworthy is how Sigma men handle the inevitable social friction this selective approach creates. They neither apologize for their nonconformity nor try to convince others to adopt their perspective. They simply continue making independent choices while allowing others the same freedom. This combination of firm boundary setting without evangelism is what distinguishes true Sigma behavior from adolescent rebellion or contrarian posturing. In practice, this intolerance for forced conformity creates a distinctive liberation in the Sigma male's life. They're immune to many social manipulation tactics that work on others. Appeals to what everyone else is doing, social shaming, or peer pressure simply don't register as relevant factors in their decision-making. This immunity gives them an almost unfair advantage in maintaining their course when social winds change direction. This doesn't mean Sigma men are immune to social influence entirely. The key difference is that they choose their influences consciously rather than absorbing them passively. They might deeply value the opinions of specific individuals they respect, while completely disregarding the opinions of larger groups, regardless of their authority or consensus. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for forced conformity begins with a social norm inventory. Examine the various ways you currently conform to expectations in your work, relationships, and lifestyle. For each one, ask, if this weren't the expected behavior, would I choose it independently based on my own values and goals? Start eliminating conformity that doesn't serve a purpose beyond avoiding social friction. Chapter 5. Disrespect of personal boundaries. The fifth thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is any disrespect of their carefully established personal boundaries. This boundary consciousness is central to the Sigma male's ability to maintain independence within social systems that constantly push for compliance and access. Unlike many who set boundaries reactively or inconsistently, Sigma men approach boundary setting as a proactive, strategic discipline. They clearly define their physical, mental, emotional, financial, and temporal boundaries before interactions occur, not as afterthoughts when violations have already begun. This clarity allows them to respond to boundary tests with immediate, proportionate consequences rather than escalating warnings. The Sigma male's boundaries are particularly distinctive in three areas. First, information boundaries. They control, with remarkable precision, what personal information becomes available to whom. Second, attention boundaries. They guard their mental focus as a non-renewable resource, refusing to allow others to commandeer it without consent. Third, energy boundaries. They monitor and regulate how much emotional and psychological energy they invest in various relationships and activities. Consider how a Sigma male handles unwanted advice. Where others might politely listen while internally dismissing it, the Sigma directly states, "I appreciate your interest, but I'm not seeking input on this decision." If the advice continues, he doesn't escalate to anger, but simply disengages from the conversation entirely. The boundary violation is met with an immediate removal of access, rather than an emotional reaction. This approach extends to professional settings as well. Sigma men are known for establishing clear parameters around their work. When they're available, how they can be contacted, what tasks fall within their scope, and what compensation they require. They don't gradually build resentment when these boundaries are tested. They simply enforce them matter-of-factly, willing to walk away from opportunities that don't respect their terms. Perhaps most significantly, Sigma men apply this boundary discipline to authority figures just as readily as peers. They don't automatically grant additional boundary access to those with titles, wealth, or social status. While they may respect genuine expertise, they don't confuse organizational authority with the right to override their personal boundaries in areas beyond specific professional contexts. In practice, this comprehensive boundary system creates what others perceive as the Sigma male's characteristic force field, an invisible but palpable barrier that discourages casual impositions before they're even attempted. People naturally sense that crossing a Sigma's boundaries will result in immediate consequences, making them think twice before making requests or demands they might casually make of others. This doesn't mean Sigma men are harsh or unapproachable. Many are exceptionally generous with their time, knowledge, and resources, but always on their terms, as conscious choices rather than responses to pressure or manipulation. When they do choose to help others, it comes from genuine desire rather than boundary weakness, making their assistance both more valuable and more sustainable. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for boundary violations begins with boundary clarity. Take time to explicitly define your non-negotiable boundaries in each life domain. Practice articulating these boundaries clearly and calmly before they're tested. Then focus on the crucial discipline of consistent enforcement, responding to each violation with an appropriate consequence, regardless of who commits the violation or in what context. Chapter 6. Empty status symbols. The sixth thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is the pursuit of empty status symbols, the trappings of success that serve primarily to signal position within social hierarchies rather than providing genuine utility or meaning. This rejection of status games is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Sigma behavior. Unlike alphas, who actively pursue status markers to maintain their position, or betas who pursue them to gain acceptance, Sigma men evaluate possessions, affiliations, and achievements solely on their intrinsic value. They ask, does this thing genuinely enhance my life experience? Does it facilitate my purpose? Does it reflect my authentic preferences? If the honest answer is no, they refuse to allocate resources to it, regardless of how impressive it might appear to others. This doesn't mean Sigma men reject quality or success, quite the opposite. They often possess excellent things and achieve remarkable outcomes. The crucial difference is that these acquisitions and accomplishments are aligned with their internal values rather than external expectations. A Sigma might drive an expensive car because he genuinely appreciates its engineering, while completely disregarding the brand's prestige. Or he might drive a practical, unremarkable vehicle, despite having the means for luxury, completely unmoved by what others might think of this choice. Consider how this plays out with educational credentials. A Sigma male might pursue an advanced degree from a prestigious institution because the specific knowledge serves his purpose, while showing complete disinterest in leveraging the credentials socially. Conversely, he might bypass formal education entirely in favor of self-directed learning if it better serves his goals, completely undeterred by the absence of certificates to validate his knowledge to others. This rejection of empty status extends to social affiliations as well. Sigma men evaluate relationships and memberships based on their substance rather than their signaling value. They're famously willing to decline invitations to exclusive groups that others desperately pursue, while possibly investing deeply in obscure communities that align with their interests, regardless of their social cachet. Perhaps most tellingly, Sigma men often practice what might be called reverse status signaling, deliberately understating their accomplishments and capabilities rather than highlighting them. They're comfortable knowing what they've achieved, without needing external validation, and they often find that this quiet confidence paradoxically commands more genuine respect than obvious status displays. In practice, this intolerance for empty status creates a distinctive pattern in the Sigma male's life and environment. His possessions tend to reflect genuine utility and personal meaning rather than following trends. His activities align with his interests rather than what's currently prestigious. His appearance balances his authentic aesthetic preferences with practical considerations rather than fashion dictates. This doesn't mean Sigma men are immune to appreciating beauty, quality, or excellence. They often have highly refined tastes and standards. The difference is that these standards are internally generated rather than socially determined. A Sigma might spend substantially on things others consider trivial, while being completely frugal in areas others think important for someone of his means or position. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for empty status begins with a status audit. Examine your possessions, activities, and affiliations honestly, asking, if no one else ever knew I owned, did, belonged to this, would I still value it equally? Begin eliminating or replacing the items and activities that lose significant value when no one else knows about them. Focus on building a life that feels right on the inside rather than looks right from the outside. Chapter 7. Emotional Dependency. The seventh thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is emotional dependency, both in themselves and in their relationships with others. This commitment to emotional self-sufficiency is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the Sigma mindset to develop, but also the most liberating once established. Unlike the stereotypical alpha who might suppress emotions to maintain control, or the beta who might readily share emotions to build connection, the Sigma male takes a more nuanced approach. He fully experiences his emotions without being governed by them. He processes them privately and thoroughly, rather than impulsively acting on them or seeking immediate external validation for them. This doesn't mean Sigma men are emotionally detached or unavailable. Many have profound emotional depths and form meaningful connections. The distinction is that these connections are choices rather than necessities. A Sigma enters relationships from a position of emotional self-sufficiency, seeing connections as enrichments to his life rather than missing pieces that complete him. Consider how this manifests in romantic relationships, where others might seek partners to fulfill unmet emotional needs or validate their worth. The Sigma has already established internal emotional stability. This allows him to select partners based on mutual growth and compatible values rather than psychological dependency. He doesn't need his partner to make him feel confident, worthy, or complete. He brings these qualities into the relationship independently. This approach extends to all relationships. Sigma men don't use friends as emotional crutches, family as identity foundations, or mentors as decision makers. While they value these connections deeply, they maintain sovereignty over their emotional states and life choices. This creates remarkably stable relationships that thrive on mutual respect rather than mutual need. Perhaps most important is how Sigma men handle negative emotions. Rather than seeking immediate comfort or distraction, they develop the capacity to sit with discomfort, examining its sources and extracting its lessons. This emotional resilience becomes a cornerstone of their independence, allowing them to maintain equilibrium through circumstances that might destabilize others. In practice, this intolerance for emotional dependency creates what others perceive as the Sigma male's characteristic emotional stability. While they experience the full spectrum of human emotions, these emotions move through them cleanly, without lingering or controlling their behavior. This gives them a distinctive presence that combines genuine emotional depth with unusual self-containment. This doesn't mean Sigma men never seek support or connection during difficult times. The key difference is that they approach support as a conscious resource to accelerate their own processing rather than as an emotional outsourcing strategy. They retain ownership of their emotional states even when discussing them with trusted others. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for emotional dependency begins with emotional literacy. Learn to identify and name your emotional states with precision. Practice sitting with uncomfortable emotions rather than immediately seeking relief. Develop personal processing rituals that allow you to extract insight from emotional triggers without external validation. Gradually reduce reliance on others for emotional regulation while simultaneously deepening your capacity for genuine connection. Chapter 8: Mediocrity and Complacency. The eighth and final thing Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate is mediocrity and complacency, both in themselves and in those they choose to associate with closely. This relentless pursuit of excellence is the engine that drives the Sigma male's continuous evolution and distinctive impact. Unlike alphas who might pursue excellence primarily in domains that confer status, or betas who might calibrate their efforts to group norms, Sigma men establish their own rigorous standards based on their personal values and potential. These standards often exceed conventional expectations in areas they deem important, while potentially ignoring conventional markers entirely in areas they consider irrelevant. This doesn't mean Sigma men demand perfection in all things. That would be both impossible and inefficient. Rather, they practice strategic excellence, directing their highest standards toward their core priorities while intentionally accepting adequacy in peripheral areas. This focused approach allows them to achieve remarkable results in their chosen domains without exhausting themselves through unsustainable perfectionism. Consider how this manifests in skill development, where others might be satisfied with reaching competence in a valuable skill. The Sigma continues refining and deepening his mastery long after receiving external validation. Conversely, he might completely neglect developing skills that others consider essential if they don't align with his path, regardless of social pressure to conform. This intolerance for mediocrity extends beyond skills to all aspects of life quality. Sigma men refuse to accept stagnant relationships, unfulfilling work, or uninspiring environments simply because they're comfortable or conventional. They regularly evaluate these elements against their potential, making sometimes difficult changes when the gap between current reality and possibility becomes too great. Perhaps most significantly, Sigma men apply this standard to their understanding and thinking. They refuse intellectual complacency, regularly challenging their own assumptions and seeking out perspectives that might reveal blind spots in their worldview. This commitment to continuous cognitive evolution helps explain why many Sigma men seem to accelerate in capability and impact with age rather than plateauing. In practice, this intolerance for mediocrity creates what others perceive as the Sigma male's characteristic intensity and momentum. They seem to be in constant forward motion, not from restlessness, but from a deep commitment to actualize their potential. This motion isn't frenetic or attention-seeking, but deliberate and often barely visible to casual observers. This doesn't mean Sigma men never rest or enjoy the present moment. In fact, many practice deliberate periods of deep rest and presence, recognizing these as essential to sustainable excellence rather than contradictions to it. The difference is that these periods serve as strategic renewals rather than defaults or escapes. For those developing a Sigma mindset, building this intolerance for mediocrity begins with honest self-assessment. Identify the areas of life where you've accepted good enough, despite having potential for excellence. Start with just one or two priority domains and establish clear, self-directed standards that exceed conventional expectations. Develop consistent practices that move you toward these standards, focusing on incremental but relentless progress rather than dramatic but unsustainable efforts. Conclusion. As we've explored these 8 things that Sigma men absolutely refuse to tolerate, a cohesive philosophy emerges, one built on uncompromising self-ownership, strategic independence, and continual self-evolution. The Sigma male doesn't just reject these 8 elements. He actively builds their opposites into his life, creating a foundation for extraordinary impact and personal freedom. What distinguishes true Sigma men is not just their intolerance for these limitations, but their ability to transcend them without becoming bitter or reactionary. They don't fight against these elements so much as simply step around them, focusing their energy on building rather than battling. This positive focus allows them to maintain the distinctive calm that makes their strength so magnetic. If you've recognized aspects of your own thinking in this exploration, you likely already possess the Sigma foundation. The path forward isn't about dramatically changing who you are, but about becoming more deliberately who you already are at your core, refining and intensifying your natural tendencies toward independence and excellence. We've only scratched the surface of the Sigma male mindset in this video. If you want to continue this journey of understanding and developing these powerful traits, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Unlike other channels that focus on surface-level tactics or stereotypes, we dive deep into the authentic psychology and practical philosophy that underpins true Sigma behavior. Hit subscribe now and activate notifications to ensure you never miss our upcoming videos on specific Sigma development strategies, common pitfalls in the Sigma journey, and advanced concepts for those already well along this path. The community forming around these ideas is becoming a valuable resource for men committed to mastering their lives on their own terms. Join us and accelerate your own evolution. Until next time, remember that the most important boundaries to maintain are the ones you set for yourself. The standards that matter most are the ones that align with your deepest values, and the only approval worth seeking is your own, earned through consistent alignment between your actions and your principles.